A close colleague who collaborated with global first philosopher Ashok Gangadean and who understood Gangadean's unprecedented advances at the uncharted frontier of global reason, global wisdom, and source life in his lifelong quest to gain deeper access to the long emerging Logos Code, asked him, "If I were to create a competent and accurate biography of Gangadean's quest, a posthumous narrative after Gangadean is no longer with us in this world and this familiar narrative space, how would such a bio-narrative unfold?" This concerned biographer witnessed and participated in Gangadean's quest for the all-important Logos Code and his rendering of the greatest story never told. This biographer was sensitive to the life-shifting and world-shifting innovation of the missing code notation, the clarification as never before of the profound shift from language to language, from derivative forms of mental processing to the source word of Logos presence. Since Gangadean's breakthrough to the Logos Code, to source language of being and reality, it was clear to the biographer that this narrative of Gangadean's innovative advances could not be competently rendered or expressed in our more familiar form of biography and narration. In fact, this was one of the striking findings of Gangadean's access to the Logos Code. This greatest story never told, since it can't be told, and Gangadean's quest for the missing Logos Code had to be rendered in a new form of narration, of biography. Gangadean was sympathetic to this biographer's legitimate challenge, and he agreed to perform experimentally a new posthumous bio-narrative, speaking to the biographer from the newly gained access to the voice of presence, the language of the logosphere, the meditative narrative, from the source word. So please join us in this adventure into this new frontier of posthumous bio-narratology. In the following trailer series, Gangadean seeks to step back from our customary forms of narration to coach and advise the qualified biographer on certain high points in Gangadean's lifelong quest for the missing code of Logos and this greatest story never told. Welcome to Presence.
I was asked by someone who wanted to do a half-an-hour video of my work as a philosopher over the past 60 years. And he asked me to tell my story from my point of view, from my voice, of what I see as the breakthrough moments in my career, in my long attempt to resonate to the source of being, the source of reason, the source of life, the source of truth, knowledge, love. And I thought it would be very interesting for me to, almost in a posthumous voice, as if I'm gone. So you can see these videos that speak about great philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, and that's it. And they frame it, Heidegger, Sartre. And what would a bio video of Ashok Gangadean say? And it's very interesting because I see my life work as relentlessly and tirelessly listening and responding to the call of Logos, the Greek word for the source of life and being in the Greek, but also as a logician and ontologist, a science of being, logician, a science of thought and consciousness and meaning and truth, and knowledge, which is logic, and ontology, which is the background of the last 60 years of my life. What would that story look like? So in that spirit of stepping out of the way, stepping back from Ashok, and allowing Ashok Logos, the tapping into the I-thou connection with the source. And what would that bio and narrative look like? Because what's interesting is that it will require a breakthrough in a deeper form of narratology and storytelling. And in my journey as a first philosopher, what is the first philosophy? a logician ontologist. Ontos is the science of being, and that's a global enterprise. All our great scriptures, enlightenment teachers, wisdom teachers are in effect serving first narrative. And the first narrative is really the attempt to recognize that there's a unifying force that is the ground of existence in nature, the universe, our lives, and all of the vast diversity, somehow held together. And that would be what is first. And it's being, it's reality. So ontology, ontos from the Greek. Ontos is being and logos is the science. Ontos logos is science of being. And logic is the science of logos, which is what are the laws of reason and thought and meaning and language? What is the deep structure of language and thought, consciousness, experience, and the human adventure? And over the decades, 60 past years of Gangadean's journey, it's been a journey to seek a deeper access to the Logos, to the Sophia, Philosophia, the lover of Sophia. I'm using the Greek words because I could say in the Judaic tradition, Yahweh, or in the Arabic, Allah, or in the Christian God, or Geist, or Great Spirit, or the Hindu scriptures and first philosophies, the Vedic science of yoga, of Brahman, Om, Krishna as the incarnation of Vishnu, Brahman, speaking in the Bhagavad Gita, or Buddha, first philosophy, first science. Buddha is seeking to see that the human situation, humans in the human development are suffering in all kinds of ways, not just physical sufferings, disease, old age, death, starvation, but existential suffering, ontological suffering. So we're existential, ontological means our being is afflicted, we're broken, we're fragmented. Why? Because we're alienated from being. And Buddha's breakthrough medically, and he said, I'm not here to give academic theory. I'm here to remove the arrow of suffering. I want to end the suffering in the human condition. And he saw that it had to do with how we're using our minds. And there's malpractice in how we use our minds. And Buddha chose to break away from the traditional ways of calling out to what's first, and he called it shunyata. In the Sanskrit, emptiness, radical nothingness, no thingness. And that's a problematic point because any of these great first teachers, I mentioned a few. We could go to Lao Tzu and the Tao, seeking the grammar of Tao, what is first, the ultimate infinite. So whatever name is first philosophy, the quest for what is first. What is first? Even before you give a name to it, from any culture or language or ethnicity or religious orientation, what is first is more primal and deep. And that's been my quest over the past 60 years. And the more I studied the great first traditions and scriptures, think of Moses bringing the laws of God in his deep encounter with Yahweh at the burning bush. And what does that mean to translate the law of the laws of God in the presence of God and bring it down to everyday culture? It's quite a journey and a bridge to cross. Or Jesus, as John says, the Logos in the flesh, moving from the Hebraic to the Hellenistic, the Greek. And John in his gospel, in the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And the Logos became flesh in the incarnation, allegedly, of Jesus. And Jesus is speaking the Logos language. I am the way, the truth, the life. Strange language. Our first teachers, as they began to break through to a deeper encounter with what is first across the planet over the past 2,500 years. So it's our scriptures, too, our practical existential first narratives. The biblical scriptures are narratives of what is first, by whatever name we use. And so my life has been living in these great scriptures, traditions across the planet. My career has been unfolding at Haverford College outside of Philadelphia. founded by the Quakers. Who are the Quakers? Lovers of truth, friends of truth, founding this college on Quaker principles. What is that? The word Quaker is a misnomer. It's a nickname. They're the Society of the Friends of Truth. And what they found is that the Christ, God, is within us. And that may sound like a quaint thing to say. And by the way, think of the founders of 1776 here in Philadelphia. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by the source, by nature's God, God's nature, with inalienable rights, life, liberty, well-being. That's first. The founders were tapping what's first. So it echoes across the planet for 2,500 years. The greatest minds, men and women of the ages, have been trying to get a deeper encounter and access to what is first by whatever name we may use. But what I found as a first philosopher, as I studied and lived and taught these different traditions for decades and enter into them and try to bring them to life, that they were still in silos, and I was participating in the silo. Silo, I mean, they're cut off. So there is the Bhagavad Gita and Hindu wisdom and the yoga technology. And there is Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the Greek wisdom, tapping the logos and opening up the light of reason, which is wisdom and knowledge and science in the deepest sense. And Plato was saying, until we have wisdom in the leadership of our political space, the polis, there will never be justice in the society or the republic. We have to tap the logos. But you could teach Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, or go move over centuries past Augustine and Aquinas, the Christian theologians, into the Arabic, wisdom brought through in the Middle Ages of Arabic wisdom. Ibn Arabi and other geniuses seeing what is first and the unifying power of what is first. Or going from Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. This great logician, mathematical genius, Descartes, saw that there's something about our everyday life and culture. I'll use a hologram in a moment just to try and picture what was the greatest breakthrough in my journey as a philosopher, which I think opens up a new chapter in human evolution. It's a bold thing to say, and it's not about me or what I saw, but about what is uncovered. And what is that? Which I call the greatest story never told, not yet told. Because our narrative powers, such as they are, great as they are still in a derivative form until we access the source of the word, the logos. In its deepest firstness, we are still in a derivative form and can't tap and access into what is first in the deepest sense of primary ontology or first philosophy. And one of the greatest breakthroughs in my journey was to see, wait a minute, when you look at these great traditions, Plato, Aristotle, first philosophy is named by Aristotle in his metaphysics. Until we get the grammar of being, everything is derivative of being. That's why it's first. Nothing can be without being. And if being, ontos, is primary, and that's the logos in the Greek word, or in the Judaic, it's Yahweh, or Allah, or Brahman, or Om, or Tao, Shunyata, all of these names, Geist, Great Spirit, Unified Field, whatever name we use for it. What's remarkable is that these great traditions were literate enough to know that what is first cannot be bound. You cannot place a boundary. You cannot make it finite. You cannot define it. You cannot, set boundaries around it. It blows them away. By its nature, what is first is boundless, transfinite, infinite. But not in our ordinary ways of thinking about finite or infinite, but profoundly infinite. Why? Can there be more than one philosophy? Is what is first the infinite? Is it? If it's boundless and beyond our everyday vocabulary and ways of thinking and the software we're using in our minds of reason, great as it may be, to tap the logic of language, across our great languages, across the human cultures, across the planet. If logic is getting to the deeper structure of all languages, is the logic still derivative until we somehow have a deeper access to the missing code of logos? And I'm using the word logos as a stand-in now for all possible first names. We didn't have a common name because of the silo effect. If you have Om and Brahman over here, and Shunyata over there, and Tao over there, and Yahweh over here, and Allah over there, and Christ over here, and so forth. You have Plato over here, and Aristotle, and Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Kant, Hegel. I've lived through all of these great thinkers for decades. And what's remarkable is that they're seeing we've got to find a way to get to what is first. Hegel, after Kant, is suggesting Geistwissenschaft. Geist meaning the infinite. Spirit is what's moving history. For example, Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. He says, and notice the word meditation. Let's meditate, because he saw Descartes. I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm trying to give you a sense of breaking the silo. I want to break the silo with you. Because for me, in my journey, that opened up a whole new frontier of human evolution and the human condition. What if you can't silo the logos? I'm using temperate. You choose your first name. I'm using logos because it's more ecumenical in the sense that it's speaking of the light of reason for all humans across the planet. Through the light of reason, which is different from Om or Tao or Brahman or Yahweh or Allah. Something is wrong. Because why? Because when you begin to following these genius minds of tapping what is first and realizing it's transfinite and it's infinite, you realize right away there's a deep logic that's missing of what is first, by whatever name we use. It means that you can't have more than one. Why? Because one or two will other it, and if you other the infinite, it's not infinite. So the logic of the infinite carried out relentlessly implies it's infinitely one, not ordinary one. We throw the united and one and many in those words. That cannot apply to the deepest level of the logos. The first big issue, one of the great breakthroughs in my journey was to see that multiplicity and diversity is all within the power of the unifying force of the infinite, not outside of it. It's not first you have unity and then you have diversity and plurality. No, diversity, the potential of boundless, infinite diversity is built into the infinite unity of what is first. So the logos is infinitely, I'll use the Latin word to give a soft bill of language for the logos. And the breakthrough of my life work in seeking to get to stand on the shoulders and wings and arms and minds of our great men and women of the ages, 2,500 years, listening to them deeply, and not taking them. Once you see that the infinite is infinitely one, and the infinite diversity in that infinite unity, unum pluribus, borrow those words. Pluribus means multiple, multiplicity, boundless, infinite multiplicity, unum, infinite unity. Logos is unum pluribus, that's one name. Infinite unity in the diversity, and you can't break them apart. So infinite diversity is embraced in the womb of infinite unum unity, and that means they're all connected. You can't break pieces. You can't have silos. You can't have atomic entities, separate beings outside of the flow of the infinite. If you have the infinite space, and I'll put a visual in a moment to kind of visualize this and make it more tangible. If you have an infinite space and you have something outside of that, it will other it. And to other the infinite will be to demote it. And that unit, that grain of sand that is outside of the infinite, or that cell, or that grain of man outside of the infinite, will in effect become infinite other to the infinite. So the logic of the infinite is relentless and profound. Once you get out of the silo and say, wait a minute, the Vedic science of yoga, all the way from the rishis of the Upanishads and through the Bhagavad Gita, and Shankara, and Rama Sutra, and all the way through the centuries to Aurobindo, trying to get to see that Brahman evolves. Or going from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Heraclitus, Parmenides in the early Greek, all the way through the ages, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, the modern logic, Frege, phenomenology of Husserl, Sartre, Heidegger, and beyond. When Heidegger himself, in his early work, Sein und Zeit, is the first as an ontologist. Great example of what my teachers, when in Sein und Zeit, he was seeing it, being is not in the subject of what we talk about. It's deeper. It's in the Dasein, not Sein, but Dasein. The being there of a human being, existentially. Before we get a name and have a narrative, a CV, something deeper is there in the existential before the essential. That's Heidegger. And then in his later career, he said, wait a minute. We're still on our way to language. Language is a house of being. We're meditative being. We're not, there are two kinds of thinking. Calculative, that's Heidegger. At the height of his mature career is pointing to exactly what I stood again on the shoulders of these great thinkers at the frontier. Jacques Derrida and Difference and postmodern otherness and alterity and difference, the primacy of difference and multiplicity, in contrast to the primacy of unity, of modernism and postmodernism. I began to see that they're all in the same logical space, rational space, and we haven't really seen a pathway to opening up the code of the logos. That's where my life was focused for decades. The relentless quest of first philosophy out of the silos and realizing that the infinite source, its infinite oneness, connects all of our different possible narratives, all worlds, all narratives, all lives, all beings are situated in the infinite unum pluribus of the logosphere. And so what is this? What is the code of this? Once you break the silos and you see that the Yahweh, the Allah, the Brahman, the Om, the Tao, Geist, these names for the infinite converge. They can't not converge. That's the breakthrough to the missing power of Logos. And when you begin to see that, infinite unum, the infinite unity, then something that is echoed through the ages in the Vedic tradition of yoga, the Om is in everyone. Or Blake, the poet, infinity in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour. That kind of thinking. Or Quakers, there's God in everyone. Christ in everyone. And Christ is one with the Logos. Christ is the Logos speaking. What is the language of Logos? What is the grammar? What is the logic of that missing language? That's what I focused on. That's what I feel in my quest as a logician and ontologist and first philosopher. I was taken to a global space. That was a breakthrough in my life. I'm appointed at Haverford College as the Margaret Guest Professor of Global Philosophy, recognizing that global philosophy is a new frontier where we can't silo our great wisdom traditions and scriptures. They've got to really be brought into a deep dialogue of distinctness. It doesn't mean they're the same. It doesn't mean that Brahman is the same as Yahweh or Allah or Shunyata. No, there's diversity, but the diversity is profoundly connected. And so there's been a missing global logic of the code. And we didn't even have a notation to know that we were in a derivative space where the codes were not clear. What do I mean by a code? It's a logic. It's a grammar. English has a grammar, but we wouldn't have English. Music has a notation, has a grammar. Cyber logic has a code, the cyber code. The DNA is a code, a biological cellular code in the human genome, a code. So all of our language, Chinese, Swahili, Hebrew, Sanskrit, all of the languages are codes, and our games are codes. If you play cricket, there are laws and rules of cricket, or baseball, or football, or soccer, or whatever, tennis, chess. There are laws and rules of the game that define those are codes. So when we're speaking in everyday culture, we're using culture code. The consciousness, the software of the mind is a code. And that has not been sufficiently seen. We could see what's on the screen, good at that, and get the content and the information. In the information age of 2,500 years, we're not just, information age is not just with computers. That's just a way of technologically accelerating what's been there. Information, concrete of awareness, and all of our emotions and feelings and psychology too. It's all in that space. Philosophers have known that human experience has an operating code in it. Kant, for example, knew that the human wiring of our rational capacities and our sensibility to perceive really structures all that we see on the screen. So what appears on the screen is being shaped by the perceiver, by the thinker. We're not aware of that enough. We just have experience and we're naive about it, most of us. We're not critical thinkers to mind our minding, which is what great wisdom is saying. You can't just mind, you have to mind your minding. That's our gift as rational beings, is there's a deeper logos lurking that's calling us. Why? Because the infinite is making an infinite call in every cell, in every galaxy, in every subatomic element. It's an infinite force that you can't break down. Infinite logos is infinite all the way. Sophia, called her Sophia. It's Logos Sophia. Sophia is the feminine energy embodied in the cosmos, in the universe, in all of us. The Logos Sophia. It's one name. Logos Sophia is one name. So once you begin to take out the silos and separate and say, wait a minute, the infinite is infinitely one, and then you see the infinite one is holding infinite diversity, and you can't break away from that. And it doesn't stifle diversity, it empowers it. People are deeply terrified that if there is an infinite logos, a unifying foundation, ground, source for all life and all being, if being or reality is infinitely presiding over our lives, we feel as though we're being threatened or cheated from my autonomy and my free will, and I'm going to resist that. Let there be no unity over me. Some people feel that. Or if there's God, it's going to be God as I name God in my narrative. And that's what we have not seen sufficiently, that when we're experiencing, we're coding, which means, in effect, to use the analogy to computers, this is software that we're operating with. And it's a vast and profound evolutionary software that has evolved over millennia, however long, to manage and tap and harness the power of the logos, the language, the fire of logos, in order to have meaning and truth and sentences and languages, and tapping into diverse languages and experience and culture, and build politics and constitutions and laws and conventions and rules, all of that. That's coming from logos space, rational power, the logos. All people. Everyone is under the logos. And that can be frightening. How can we even think that? If wherever we are in the ethnic embeddedness of our culture and our worldview and our narratives and our perspectives and our voting with our wills and judging, please note that we humans are interpreters. We read the data and we read it with software, and the software reveals on the screen of our consciousness what is our reality, what are our truth, our facts. And we have so many different ways of morphing the lens within that space. It's an amazing space, information space, Google space, culture space as we know it, language space, reason space, rational space as we know it, has a great, vast capacity to house boundless different alternative narratives. I can be pro-life, pro-choice. I can be Big Bang, I can be Genesis. I can be more than one. I can be a biblical person, believing in the biblical truth and of creation. I can be a physicist and a scientist and believe in Big Bang. I can be, let's say, a citizen in the USA, democracy, where allegedly you keep your religion out of your politics, in allegedly an ecumenical space. And I can feel confused over my different worldviews and personalities, because when I switch worlds, I have different personae. It's normal, because when you say I as a biblical person, that the meaning of that pronoun I is not the same as when I say it as a scientist, or when I say it as a citizen to vote, or when I'm doing yoga, or when I'm practicing feng shui or the martial arts, or I'm in my therapist with a Freudian or a Jungian analyst, whatever. When you shift cultural contexts, you're shifting the vast diversity of logos narrative spaces. I'm going fast, but I'm covering 2,500 years of human development and evolution. And I haven't even put up the breakthrough is the failure to even know that there were two codes. When Jesus is speaking allegedly as the Logos in the flesh, strange language. When God is speaking to Moses and giving the laws, the language of God, Yahweh, the language of Quran. When Rumi, for example, says, there's a field beyond right and wrong and judgment, I'll meet you there. What field is that? That's a deeper space, allegedly. First philosophy, first science, first narratives. So the basic point I would wish to share, if I were to tell the story of my journey as a first philosopher in a global context, what is a global context? You're not global only in the sense of the earth, the globe, or even in the sense of the multiple narratives and cultures that we have in worlds and religions, scriptures, but getting to the source of all possible worlds and narratives and beings. Because if we and when we gain access to the missing code of logos, and we haven't done that over the centuries, we're tapping at the door in different ways, but we're still not clarifying the shift in the code and the logic. The logic of the infinite, the logic of logos is deeper. And this is the source of all, the logic of all logics. Cyber logic, right? DNA logic, mathematical logic, predicative logic, three-valued logic, semantic, all of the different logics, Hegel's logic, meditative logic, they're all coming out of the deep logic of all logics. And this is huge, because what I'm suggesting is that once we break through to a deeper access to the missing code of logos, it's a complete game changer for our human journey, evolutionary. That's what I want to focus on. So if there were to be a short synoptic video trailer of my life, it would have to be located there. When Gangadean appeared on the scene of philosophy and religions and cultures in the second half of the 20th century and into the next century, as the first philosopher, relentlessly following the call of our great first teachers and scriptures to see that there is a deeper logos code that's been missing and emerging through the ages. And it's the most vital and important focal point of everything else. Nothing can compare to the infinite being, reality, the source of all. And we're all under the source of this logosphere, Sophia sphere. And if we're eclipsed from it, for whatever reason, and our great teachers began to see, such as Buddha, that how we're using our minds can block us from an eclipse and separate us from access to being, to the source, and therefore to well-being, and to who we are, to ourself. So this is the most important pivot point in our human journey, the quest for logos, the call of logos, being first responders, first philosophers, scientists, men and women, responding to the call and presence of Sophia. And the word presence is very important. Why? Because it shows that once you see that the infinite logos is infinitely one, not just ordinary one, but infinite one, it boggles all the mathematics and numbers. It's the source of all numbers. And all diversity is arising and connected and relationally interconnected in the fractal space of the logosphere. That's our home. That changes our access to who we are as rational beings. If humans are the children of Logos, if we are the children of Logos, Logos sapien, not Lego sapiens, separate derivative units like Lego pieces, but Logos sapiens. If that's who we are, then gaining a deeper access to the logic of the source of our life, of being, would be a game changer across the board. Everything that we've been familiar with thus far in our human journey. Given the vast diversity of scriptures, orientations, narratives, disciplines, cultures, worldviews, all of that, they're still held and grounded in the Logos source, of the Logos code. But we haven't really called out and identified and gained deeper access to that differential between our everyday software codes that we're using and using us, because if we're not aware of it, then we're living in it, then the code, the Lego code, let's say, is presiding in our cultures, in our worlds, in our experience, in our life, in our human relations, and ourselves, and who we are, and our psyche. It's all under the code, the culture code that we're living in. With all of its variability and diversity and power, yes, and there's vast diversity in our orientations and narratives. We have many different perspectives and narratives in that rational space. It's a derivative rational space. So if we've been living in a derivative code, a more adolescent form of rational life and culture making and self-making and being, and then we can now have a deeper access, a breakthrough to the missing code of the source, the global source, the unum pluribus, the fractal space of being, and to find ourselves there. And our great first teachers were tapping at that space. When Descartes stepped away from the everyday sourceware, he didn't put it that way, of our information culture, where we have mathematics and we have beliefs and feelings and dreams, all of that, he says, I can doubt it. Why? Because it was not grounded. Why? It was not grounded in the source of being. And so his meditations on first philosophy, when he said, I'm stepping back from that cultural space that I've known, which is filled with doubt, which is ungrounded, and therefore we don't have science yet. And he dared to let go and step back in the infamous I am, where he was not a subject, he wasn't a predicate, he wasn't attributes, he had no name, he had no markers, no categories, he was just I am. And he realized that's deeper thinking. Meditative to thinking is deeper than information thinking. The I am is a different pronoun. The normal pronoun in everyday is a pronoun used instead of a noun. We're referring to something on the screen because we screen ourselves. We make our narratives and our self-image in the information space, all your whole CV, all of your attributes that you've developed all your life in your evolving narrative of yourself in representational language is not the same as when you step into the I am in presentation language. The logos sphere, the logos code, takes us to a deeper form of pronominalization. When you say I, you're amming. You're not referring, you're being. You're zoning, you're in the zone of being. You're surfing. And that's peak performance. That's our personal best. And our great first teachers saying, we got to get there. Why? Because that's the space of deep relationality and intimacy with being and with each other and with nature and with species. And that's a different political space. It's a different human space. And in that light, if you can get into the deeper space, I use double parentheses to mark when you're in the logos code and single markers to call out when we're in the derivative forms of culture making software. And the great first teachers saw the software that humans are dominant. We didn't name it. We didn't even see it. but it's got malware built into it. It's got a virus. It's got a code virus. And we could playfully say you can have an infection by the code, malware, a word virus, a mind virus, a life virus, an existential, ontological virus that we haven't seen or diagnosed before because we didn't even see a code issue. But it's all important. And Gangadean's life and work was really to introduce code markers of when we are in derivative codality, codification, software. And we are as we mind. Our life and world and feelings and psyche and experience is a function of how we mind. And when we're minding, we're using also a rational gift of a will to make a vote on what makes sense and what does not make sense, and which worldview and orientation and narrative I wish to adopt, or multiple languages and worlds and disciplines I wish to enter it. But being cut off from seeing that they're all nevertheless in the Logos, by losing our link with the foundation, the ground of being, of the Logosphere, of the Logos code, and not to realize that any code or discipline or language or rules of the games and conventions, norms that we play, and the ground floor of our everyday culture as we know it, are separated from the code if we don't realize that it's derivative and it's not sustainable. And yet we treat it as if it's self-contained and self-sustaining, and it's not. That's been the great tragedy of our human journey so far, according to our first teachers and scriptures. And so the most important advance in our human journey, and this is the Gangadean's work, is that we have to see that Logos is real, the Logosphere, the infinite space, the source of all. There is source all. And that's a game changer for everything that's been familiar in the human tradition. And by not having the code markers, which I will introduce in a moment to give a visual of it, then we've been living in a derivative space that's cut off and that produces fragmentation by its nature. The derivative code, the Lego mental code, software, shared by human beings and religions and scriptures and philosophers, as great as our genius men and women philosophers have been, there's been a failure to really mind the minding, even though that's the heart of all meditative wisdom. But when you mind your minding, you should see that there's software that is the source of the breakdown, of the fragmentation, the life crisis, and the failure of human relations, and the failure of love, and the failure of politics, and respect, and ethics, and rational understanding, which is wisdom. We've got to really get the Logos code and enter into the portal to presence. That's another major point. Because once you realize with the Logos code that the Logosphere, Sophia's sphere, is infinite presence, it means it pervades each of us infinitely. That is scary. Every cell, not just a cell, infinity in every cell, but in every person. Right? As the Quakers would say, for example, as the Hindu wisdom, namaste. The Om in me acknowledges the Om in you. Or African wisdom, Ubuntu. I am, you are. To realize the interconnectivity. Why? Because the Logosphere weaves everything together profoundly. You don't have separate space and time, cause, color, figure, texture, motion as Lego pieces, but space is infinitely connected with space-time. Time connected with mind connected with word connected with world, it's I connected with thou. And so the politics of the Logosphere is I, thou. The other is sacred. There's otherness, but not severance. The I and the other are interwoven. The mother and son, father and daughter, I and you, I and nature, I and the work of art, I and the music, all interwoven in the fractal power. But when we're in the derivative space, it's I and it. What's on the screen of our content of our experience is objectified. It's an object of experience, an object of thought, an object of feeling. I'm angry. I'm in love. I'm high. I'm depressed. Our feeling, all of that is in that information code all our life. And if we're treating the other as an it, and I, and it, and ourselves too, if we process ourselves in that code, we're going to itify and entify and reify and objectify ourselves and others. I and it is not the same as I, thou. And this foundation of the golden rule, and Jesus, for example, is suggesting outrageously, you've got to love even your enemy. Why? Because you're connected with the other profoundly, existentially. Not just in a relation or a wish or your will. It's deeper. It's woven into the fabric of being. That's profound. It's a different culture waiting to happen. It's a different space of the human journey, our journey to our source. As Logos kids, children of God, children, as Plato would say, as the sun illuminates the visible world, Logos illuminates the cultural, intelligible, rational world. The space of intelligence and reason, of a life of reason, and knowledge, culture. That's where I would locate Gangadean's work, as deep love and relentless pursuit of listening to our great teachers and scriptures deeply, and following their lead to see that there is what is first is infinitely one, infinitely pluribus, infinitely diverse, source of all, global. And whatever name we use, I use the Logos, the light of Logos, the light of reason, the light of being, the light of meaning, word, language, truth, meaning, knowledge, culture, love, ethics. It's a moral law. The Logos is the law. The code of Logos is interconnectivity. And that's a space of compassion. As Buddha saw, that's compassion. Feeling with and being with, Mitsein. And if we use the word predication for predicating, that comes out of the Greek tradition of logic, to think is to predicate the subjects and predicates and join them to make sense and picture the world. And I have, the screen of my head where it makes sense, and I have sentences, a picture of the world in representational language. To think is to predicate, but there's a deeper kind of thinking, double bracket, double parentheses thinking, meditative thinking, where you're surfing the zone. It's a different language. It's a profound original language. It's the origin of language. And Jesus is seeking to open that Logos in the flesh speech. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is of sentence, the sun is shining. But how can a person be the truth? How can the Logos speaking be truth, be being, be the resurrection, be the life, being the source? How can you speak if you're a Logos kid? And so to have opened up that space scientifically to get the source, the missing source, is to get the source science. It's the source of all knowledge. It's the source of all science, the Logos code. That's where we finally get into be well-formed humans, our real form, as Logos sapiens. Homo sapiens, it's not just a species of nature. It's a species of being. We're human beings. And it's not just Lego sapiens in the informationized Google space of information and objectification, subjects and objects, and so forth, as units. You can't be a separate unit apart. You're not self-sustaining in your being. Being is sustaining all of us, all the time, everywhere, the universe, everything. Nothing can be without being. And when we, as rational beings, begin to tap into that and access the source of our being and learn how to surf, which is yoga, which is Christ, which is Buddha, which is ethics, which is being a person. It may be called transpersonal because we want to find a way to break through this version of the person as a separate entity, an ego-based, allegedly self-existent being. But to tap into the Logos is a transpersonal, interpersonal, I-thou language. So I've gone on for a while, but I just want to locate, so what is the life of Gangadean arriving at the scene at this stage of human development and living with these great first scriptures and philosophers across a planet over decades and seeing that they're pointing to a deeper first. And that we didn't, and the code has been calling us and we haven't yet gotten it. We've got pieces and fragments and like an eclectic Lego silo way. But when you break the silo boundary and you begin to see it can be silo, the portal to presence opens up. And that's an important point, which means what? Being cannot be put as a name. It's not a substance. It's not a thing. It's not, no, it's presence. You say God, God is presence, infinite presence. Logos is infinite presence. Reality is infinite presence. Why? Because there's nowhere it cannot not be, and you can't break it down. It's infinitely, it's fractal. And if it's infinite presence, how do we humans access who we are as presence sapiens? We've got to mind it. How do you do it? You've got to mind your minding, which is me. You've got to see that there's a code operating that is giving us our life and our information and our culture and experience and our feelings and everything, our worlds. But there's a deeper code that's grounding that, making that work. And yet we're alienated from it. And whether you call it sin or samsara, whatever name for alienation from the source, it hurts ontologically. And our journey as humans is to mature into presence, which is that mindfulness, to be mindful. Let me just then quickly give in the sketch, what I've been saying is that let's say this is where we've been living. The humans are here, the screen is here, and this space, Google space, information space, language and pictures, right? Like, whatever sentence we have, rain is falling, sun is shining, right? And it pictures the world, and we have our facts. And we can change our lens. We can have different lens change your story. Our narratives are here. Thinking is here. Reason is here. I'm putting single marks around to mark this version of reason and thinking and consciousness and experience and culture. All here. All of our different narratives in here. And we can change our lens, right? And there's a space between the consciousness of the thinking and what we're on the object. This is the object, and this is the subject who has things, and this is experience here. All experience, all of our disciplines, mathematics. This is rational space as we know it. But our great teachers are saying, no, there's something else. There is Om. There's Tao. There's a God. There's Allah. There's Logos. Sophia. And we have to really somehow cross from there to there. And so when we hear that call of what's first, allegedly, we download that to what our information technology of what we make sense of the world here. We hear Christ, I believe in Christ. I use my will, my rational power to say yes or no to content, to beliefs, belief system, narratives, science, all here. So we download the teachings of our Buddha. If Buddha speaks and speaks of emptiness or shunyata, we say, I see the Buddha. The Buddha is wise, and we have Buddha here. No. God cannot be narrated here. Logos, Allah, first. What is first? It cannot be downloaded here. So what's going on in the two different spaces? If we don't have the markers, the code markers, then that's been the human condition. This got messy very quickly. But what I began to see listening to these great teachers is that there is a code here that's running the show of all of our diverse narratives and orientations and forms of life and worldviews are still under a code that has not been followed. I use single markers to mark or slashes to mark when we're in this code and to see that somehow it cuts us off from a deeper access. And what is that? Let's use a different marker. When you enter here, you're entering into a deeper language. This is one code software, this is another. But then you begin to realize, and this was one of the most important breakthroughs of my life, is that the infinite, you see, surrounds it all. That was a great, we're always in the logosphere. Our worlds and software couldn't operate without the infinite operator. Now we begin to see the code markers. Here's one form of life and culture and evolution. Information, great as it is, to describe the facts and have different narrations about what is true, what is false, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what I feel, what I don't feel, human relations, politics, democracy, all here. So any word here in the space, mark it this way. But what you begin to see, and this was one of the greatest breakthroughs of my life as a logician, that every X is X. Every X has a deeper meaning. I am. Space, space. Time, time. Cause, cause. Politics, politics. Love, love. So once you see the code markers, you realize that the codes were conflated. All these centuries we've been not clear on the code shift. Excuse me. We've not been clear on the code shift. Now we have markers to say, okay, what is this? This is a powerful code. And Aristotle would say, what is the logic of rational space? A is A. Is an absolute principle shaping units. And I'm a unit. And these are Lego units. A is a unit, an atom, a Lego unit piece. But there's not a logos point when you cross into the deeper code. But if we don't have the code markers, how do we know we're crossing? How do we know that the Buddha, Christ, Krishna, and other first philosophers, Descartes, was calling us to move from one code to the source code? So, voila, I would suggest this is what's now evident. This is a source. This is the unemployment of all. And every X in our everyday culture is X. And in a way, what I feel as a logician that really captures the missing law, it's not X is X, but every X is X. That's symbolism. Every X is X. I am. Space, space. So we have to learn the deeper language, the missing code of logos, presence, to enter into presence. So to sum up this kind of first initial trailer, I'm presenting this to someone who would like to see it. If I did a video of your journey, Ashok, what would it be? How would you narrate it? I would say it's the end of the age of conflation, code conflation. To be blessed as a logician and ontologist, and blessed with all the great teachers and scriptures, and to learn from them and stand with them and take it to the next step, as if handed a baton and say, Ashok, go for it. Bring us home. And to bring out the notation, the missing notation for the code shift. From Lego mental software and life to source life in presence and rising into meditative reason and meditative intelligence and love and ethics. It's the end of the age of conflation. So if I were to advise the person doing a video of the journey and life of Gangadean, it would be the greatest story never told He served that with all his heart for decades. And the greatest story he never told is not about Gangadean, it's about Bhagavad Sophia. It is recognizing that what is first. And the call of wisdom, enlightenment, and reason is to honor first as first. And if someone were to ask me, how do I see myself as a first officer of Logos, along with so many wonderful, beautiful first officers and first responders through the ages. And I joined with them in that culture. That's the greatest story never told. It's not about a human being or not about a teacher. We couldn't teach, we couldn't see without Logos. And if there's anything that I would want imparting in a posthumous sharing with the future generations and the present generations, honor Logos as real. Reality is real. It's truth, it's the ground, it's the source of all possible narratives. It's not another narrative, it's not an ideology, it's not a religion, it's not a belief system, it's deeper than that. It's a source of being. And so I see my life and service and all the great teachers of, say, the 2,500 years of scriptures is building the way to this crossing from Lego sapiens to Logos sapiens to see who we really are. And that's the culture that awaits the future generations. I have no question about it. That's the human family waiting to happen. To move from here to home, to the ground floor, in who we are. So I see my life as in service of Logos and love of Logos and love of Sophia, Philosophia, lover of Sophia, of wisdom, and trying to honor it and here, a first responder in first philosophy and taking it to a global space. That's what I see is my main contribution to the human journey, the journey of first philosophy, to the source, and to see that Logos is real as the source of all possibilities. And that when we tap that with a code shift and the end of the age of conflation, and to get code intelligence, then education is moving from this space to the source of reason and rational light and wisdom. And it's code education for the future generations. We must have code. It's baby ontology for all humans to light up the light of reason and discover who we are and enter well-being and flourishing at the end of suffering. Thank you very much.